Hi, so this week in MCS204 we have been looking at video jockeying, and basically it's coming up to our final project now, so we're all kind of thinking of compiling all our ideas together. So this week's task, we had two readings which were sort of in relation to this. The first one being an interview with Paul D. Miller and DJ Spooky, that's Subliminal Kid. So the reading is basically an interview with a man called Paul D. Miller, also known as DJ Spooky. Basically, DJ Spooky here is sort of describing himself as a memory artist, as he sort of describes his work sort of revolving around the social implications of technology, which is quite relevant, obviously, to viral video production and everything that we're learning. He sort of looks at turntables and records as expressive terms for sort of kind of showing your true self, and you don't necessarily need speech or any other formats. You can just music, or in his form DJing is his way of just being expressive. So he just kind of looks at how it can sort of evoke emotions on its own. And he also he has a very interesting statement, how he says that people need music to identify themselves, which I think is obviously quite a prominent part of today, especially with young people and teenagers. They tend to identify themselves through the music they listen to, or take characteristics from different bands or artists that they like and bring it to identify themselves kind of together. Obviously you've got kind of the different genres relating to different kinds of people. So I thought that was really interesting on what he picked up on. He also looked at sort of high and low distinction, which I found also really interesting, as it kind of means different styles of music linked to different classes almost. So you have, well, for instance, him and DJing would be seen as lower classes and more for the, I don't know, the non-academics and sort of bourgeoisie members of society, which was a really interesting factor. He overall sort of looks at how music defines you. He believes that that's sort of a really important way to see it, and as well as sort of listening to his music, he believes that he can sort of express himself through doing this. He also looks at how, in order to be successful, we just need to sort of mess around and enjoy, and sort of not worry about what people or viewers are going to think who sort of view your work, because it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of your expressions and your individuality and kind of identifies you, and that's where it goes wrong, really. If you're worried about what people are going to think, you're not going to be as expressive. I think that's obviously definitely important to this course that we're doing, because obviously we're doing exactly what he's doing here, and just kind of using it to identify ourselves and doing what we want to do. So I found that really relevant to this, and definitely a really interesting reading. He does kind of roughly touch on theory, and looks at how everyone can have their own theory. So it's quite a broad factor, really. Like even people like Eminem, he sort of looks at hip hop briefly and brings theory into this. But overall, I think it's really relevant to our final project, and his perceptions have been are very insightful, especially sort of coming from another, obviously more experienced and professional media producer. So the second reading also includes DJ Spooky, but this is sort of a piece of work that he's written himself, opposed to the interview, which was a bit more sort of academic and quite harder to interpret, I found. But it was still really interesting all the same, and he picked up on some really good points. He basically looks at sort of loops of perception and sort of sampling memory, and the semantic web, which is what the title of the reading is. And he describes the reading basically as an essay about memory as a vast playhouse, as where any sound can be you, which sort of links back to him before with looking at turntables and using it as a way of expression. So he's kind of interested in how the media affects sort of, or acts as this conditioner of how we interpret content in our minds. So through conversation, as it, it can be recorded, adapted, remixed and uploaded, but we can also ourselves become this remix currency, basically. An interesting quote that he says was how we live in an era where quotation and sampling operate on such a deep level that archaeology of what can be called knowledge floats in a murky realm between the real and unreal. So basically sort of looking at how our thought processes sort of echo text, which we're familiar with, and how sort of sampling them creates this sort of new remix to be communicated with other people, so it can kind of act as communication almost that people are familiar with. So he also sort of discusses the expansion of the World Wide Web. He sees this as like this next generation thing, and he describes sort of how it leads to being almost a more difficult way to sort of obtain information efficiently. He states how it's undergoing this crisis of meaning, which is obviously seen with the sort of extensive information which is out there, as it's sort of getting harder to define things now. But he believes everyone sort of has this expression with him through his music of new ways to sort of communicate, which I found really interesting. But so he basically looks at this loop of perception, which is sort of this relentless hall of mirrors in the mind, and then he looks at sampling, which is sort of seen as a story you tell yourself. So it's the act of memory moving from word to word as a remix. So I definitely found him a really interesting read for this viral video course, and he's definitely going to be one of the theorists, I think, which I will be discussing further in my final project. So yeah, thank you.